When he jumped from the couch, the floor shook. Kittens don't do that. I thought I rescued a tiny kitten from a quiet Nebraska cornfield, until the kitten started growing faster than anything I'd ever seen. His paws got bigger, his voice deeper, and soon my small apartment could no longer hide the truth. I wasn't raising a house cat. I was raising a lion. The sound didn't make sense at first. Blake Thompson had stopped his truck along the narrow gravel road only because something tugged at him. A tiny, quivering cry carried by the Nebraska wind. Late evening light stretched across the endless cornfield, turning the rows of tall stalks into golden shadow walls. He stood still for a moment, listening. There it was again, thin and fragile, like something barely holding on to life. He took a cautious step into the field, parting the stalks with his arms. The ground was soft beneath his boots, still warm from the day's sun. Every few feet he stopped, listening for the cry. It came again, this time closer and more desperate. Blake moved faster, brushing aside leaves that scratched at his arms. His breath thickened with worry. Out here, any small creature could be lost. Coyotes, hawks, cold nights. Then he saw movement near the base of a stalk. Something tiny, trembling, curled against the dirt. He crouched down slowly. A small bundle of tan fur lay barely breathing, its body shivering in intermittent jolts. For a second, Blake's heart stalled. He whispered, "Hey there, little guy. What happened to you?" He reached out a cautious hand, expecting the creature to bolt or hiss or try to scratch. Instead, it lifted a weak paw, no bigger than the tip of his thumb, and placed it on his finger as if pleading. The tiny thing tried to mew, but only a rasp came out. Blake felt something tighten in his chest. That simple touch, light, clinging, trusting, hit him harder than he expected. Something about it felt like holding a heartbeat in his hand. He gently scooped the little body up with both palms, cradling it against his shirt. It was warmer than he thought, but the kind of warmth that felt feverish, wrong. He looked around the field, searching for any sign of a mother cat, a shadow, rustling, anything. There was nothing but the whisper of corn leaves. He whispered again, softer this time. "It's okay. I've got you." Walking back toward the truck, he loosened his jacket and wrapped the small creature inside it. Every few steps, a tremor shook the tiny body, and Blake held it closer, instinct overriding reason. He wasn't a vet. He wasn't an expert, but he couldn't leave something so helpless to die alone in the dirt. Not when it clung to him like that. Inside the truck cab, the creature let out a soft, broken whimper. Blake placed one hand gently over the jacket, offering pressure and warmth. With his free hand, he fumbled for his phone, switched to the front camera, and angled it toward the bundle. "Jamie," he murmured, hitting video call. "You're not going to believe what I just found." Jamie answered on the second ring, her face filling the screen beneath fluorescent kitchen lights. "Where the heck are you? It sounds windy." "In the middle of a cornfield," Blake said, angling the camera down. "Found this little guy just lying out here." Jamie squinted. "A kitten? That's what I'm thinking." There was a pause, longer than he expected. Jamie leaned closer to her camera, her brows drawing tight. "Blake, that doesn't look like a normal kitten." He let out a small, nervous laugh. "He's probably just dirty, or scared, or from some wild litter." "Maybe," Jamie said, but her voice dipped with uncertainty. "But its paws look huge. And its head—" "Jamie," he cut in gently, "it's freezing out here. I'll clean him up at home. We'll figure it out later." The creature stirred under the jacket, pushing weakly against his chest. Blake looked down and felt that soft pull again, that instinctive, protective ache. Whatever this was, however strange or unusual the little body looked, it needed him. Right now, that was the only truth that mattered. He ended the call and exhaled, settling the creature more securely in his arms. As he drove away from the cornfield, the night closing in around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of something he didn't understand yet. Something waiting quietly beneath each tiny tremble of the creature's breath. But for now, all he could do was whisper reassurances, keep one steady hand on the small, warm life tucked against him, and hope he wasn't already in deeper than he realized. By the time Blake pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex, the little creature had fallen asleep against his chest, its breathing shallow but steadier than before. The building lights hummed softly in the dark, moths circling the warm glow. Blake stepped out of the truck with slow, careful movements, holding the jacket-wrapped bundle close as if a single breeze might steal it away. The stairwell echoed under his boots as he climbed to the third floor, each step a reminder that he had no idea what he was bringing home. As he unlocked the door and stepped inside, the quiet of the apartment wrapped around him in a familiar way. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it felt like the air was holding its breath. He laid the tiny creature on a folded towel on the kitchen counter and finally got a good look under the brighter light. The fur was thicker than he expected, a rich, tawny color, not like the dusty grays and browns of stray barn cats he'd seen over the years. He dipped a cloth into warm water and gently cleaned the dirt from its face. The creature blinked weakly, letting out a small, rumbling sound that startled him. Something deeper than a meow, almost like a tiny engine turning over. Blake froze for a moment, cloth suspended midair, waiting for some instinct to kick in and tell him what he was dealing with. It didn't come. Instead, the creature nudged its face into his palm, and his heart softened all over again. "All right," he whispered, forcing a breath. "You're safe now. I've got you." He warmed a small bowl of milk and soaked the corner of a towel, bringing it gently to the creature's lips. It latched on hungrily, gripping the cloth with paws far too large for its size. Blake blinked, tilting his head. "Well, someone's going to grow up big." The creature's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. When it finished, it lifted its head and let out another low, soft rumble. Not a purr, not a growl. Something stranger in between. He wiped its face again, then scooped it back into his arms and carried it to the living room. He sat down on the couch, the warm bundle pressed against his chest. The creature pawed weakly at his shirt collar, trying to nestle into a comfortable spot. Within seconds, it was curled up beneath his chin, breathing softly. Blake leaned his head back, exhaustion washing over him. He didn't move for a long time, afraid to disturb the fragile peace. Outside, a train horn sounded in the distance, rolling over the town in a low echo. Inside, the little creature pushed closer with every breath. When his eyes began to droop, his phone buzzed. It was Jamie again. He shifted carefully, sliding the phone from his pocket. "Did you get him home okay?" she asked immediately. Her voice carried that familiar mix of worry and gentle teasing he'd known since high school. "Yeah," he whispered. "He's asleep now. Got him cleaned up a little. I'm guessing he's just a really weird-looking kitten." There was a pause. "Can you show me again?" Blake hesitated, but slowly angled the phone so the camera captured the tiny face nestled against him. Jamie squinted. "Blake, where did you say you found him?" "In the cornfield by Old County Road." "That still doesn't look like a kitten to me." Blake gave a quiet sigh. "You're overthinking it. It's just a stray. Or maybe a barn cat mix." But even as he said it, uncertainty crept into his voice. The creature's paws twitched, revealing pads that seemed wider and thicker than any house cat he'd ever owned. Its whiskers were long and straight, its nose broader, its body heavier despite its small size. Jamie must have heard the hesitation, because her tone softened. "You should sleep, Blake. Tomorrow you can take him to a vet. Get him properly checked out." Yeah, maybe." After hanging up, Blake sat quietly in the dim glow of the living room lamp. He watched the rise and fall of the small chest pressing against him. The creature's little paw rested over his thumb, as if claiming it. He didn't know why, but something inside him shifted in that moment. It wasn't reason, or even instinct. It was something deeper, older, a sense of responsibility he hadn't felt in years. He stood carefully, carrying the little one to the small guest room he rarely used. He set up a makeshift bed with towels and a heating pad on low, creating a soft cradle in the center. When he placed the creature inside, it whined at the sudden distance, reaching out its paw toward him. Blake hesitated, then gently touched its paw with his index finger. The creature immediately curled its tiny pads around him, refusing to let go. He chuckled under his breath, the sound unexpectedly tender. "All right," he murmured. "I'll stay here a bit." He sat down beside the makeshift bed, resting his back against the wall. The creature slowly released his finger and settled its head down, finally drifting into deep sleep. Blake watched for a long time, long enough for the room to cool and for the quiet to wrap around him like a blanket. The night settled deep, unbroken, except for the steady hum of the refrigerator and the tiny breaths of the little life he'd brought home. As the hours crept toward dawn, Blake's eyes grew heavy. He told himself this was temporary, just until morning. A quick vet visit, a few answers, and things would make more sense. But even as he drifted off, he knew he was lying to himself. Nothing about tonight felt temporary. Whatever this little creature was, whatever strange path had led it into that field and into his hands, it was now tangled with his life in ways he couldn't name yet. He only knew one thing for certain. He didn't regret stopping on that road. Just before sleep took him, the creature stirred, letting out that same soft rumble. Not quite a purr, not quite anything he recognized. A sound that hinted at something unfamiliar under the surface of its tiny warming body. Blake didn't open his eyes. He only whispered softly, "You're okay. I'm right here." Then he surrendered to sleep, unaware that the small room he sat in was already too small for the truth that would soon grow inside it. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in soft lines across the carpet when Blake woke with a start. His neck ached from sleeping upright against the wall, and his right arm had gone almost completely numb. He blinked away the groggy heaviness and looked down. The makeshift bed of towels was still there, and lying in the middle of it, stretching lazily like it had slept a full night on a warm summer porch, was the tiny creature. It yawned, revealing a set of small, sharp teeth that didn't match its size at all. Blake rubbed his eyes, unsure if he'd imagined it, but the creature blinked up at him as if greeting him after years apart. "Well, good morning," he murmured, voice still thick with sleep. The creature made a soft rumbling sound that vibrated deeper than any kitten he'd ever heard. It climbed unsteadily toward him, planting those oversized paws onto his thigh. Without thinking, he scooped it into his hands. Its body was warm, heavier today than it seemed last night, and it nestled under his chin like it belonged there. He carried it to the kitchen, still half awake, fumbling for the kettle with one hand. The creature watched every movement, eyes bright but gentle, its little tail flicking lazily. He fixed a warm bowl of milk again and held the cloth for it. The creature grabbed on with the same hungry determination as the night before, but something was different. Its grip was stronger, its small jaws more deliberate. Blake winced once when the tiny teeth reached too close to his finger. "You're getting bold," he muttered, but there was a smile in his voice. When it finished drinking, it pawed at his shirt again, demanding to be closer. He lifted it to his chest, and it pressed its face into his collarbone with a sigh that felt too soft, too trusting. Blake leaned against the counter, feeling something stir deep inside him, something warm, something protective, something he hadn't felt in too long. He carried the little one into the living room and settled onto the couch. The creature crawled into his lap, pawing at his shirt, kneading like a newborn, trying to find comfort. Blake reached for his phone and started recording, partly to show Jamie, partly because he didn't want to forget any of this. "Day 1, he whispered to the camera, panning down to the creature sprawled across his lap. "Found this little guy in the cornfield last night. I think he likes me." As if to confirm, the creature reached up and swatted gently at Blake's chin. After a moment, Blake ended the recording and set the phone aside. The creature began exploring the couch, wobbling with an uneven mix of curiosity and clumsiness. It tried to hop down, missed by inches, and slid to the floor in a tiny, dramatic sprawl. Blake rushed over, heart jumping, but the little one simply shook itself off and chirped at him, almost offended he had doubted its bravery. He couldn't help laughing. "Tough guy, huh? You might be small, but you're something else." As he showered and dressed for the day, the creature followed him, tottering along on unsteady legs, bumping into walls, tripping over shoes it tried to climb. When he brushed his teeth, it stood on its hind legs and pawed at his pant leg. When he got dressed, it climbed into his hamper and refused to come out until he lifted it. He kept glancing down, half afraid it would disappear if he looked away too long. This strange, needy little thing had no business trusting him so much. But every time it reached for him, every time it pressed its tiny face into his hand, something inside Blake quieted. He couldn't remember the last time he felt that. Before heading out, he set the creature carefully inside a small laundry basket padded with towels. It let out a distressed whine the moment he stepped back. Those oversized paws reached over the rim, trembling, as if begging to stay close to him. Blake hesitated, then sighed. Okay. Just while I grab my jacket." He lifted the creature out and placed it against his chest, rubbing the top of its head with gentle fingers. The little body all melted into him instantly. "Rowan," he said suddenly, the name slipping out as naturally as if he'd known it all along. "Yeah, Rowan suits you." The creature let out a small rumble. Blake smiled, pressing a light kiss to the top of its head. "Rowan it is." With Rowan nestled in the crook of his arm, he checked the time. The vet opened in an hour. He still planned to go, mostly because Jamie wouldn't let him hear the end of it otherwise. But the thought of handing Rowan over for examination sent a strange ache through him. He brushed it off, telling himself it was normal to worry. Rowan fell asleep again as he packed a small bag, towels, wipes, the milk cloth. Every so often, it twitched, stretching those big paws or making that low, mysterious rumble. The sound filled the apartment, settling into the corners of the room like it belonged there. By the time Blake sat down on the couch again, Rowan sprawled across his chest as if it owned him. He realized that the emptiness he'd been carrying around for years, quiet, heavy, always just under the surface, felt different this morning, softer, less sharp around the edges. "You're trouble, you know that?" he whispered, stroking Rowan's back. "And I think I'm already in deeper than I should be." Rowan nuzzled his shirt in response. Blake closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth soak into him. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe he should have left Rowan in the field. Maybe he was inviting a world of problems into his life. But as Rowan curled into a tighter ball on his chest, sighing in that impossibly tiny way, Blake knew he'd make the same choice again. Every time. He didn't know what Rowan was, not really, but he knew this. The little misfit belonged with him now, and for the first time in a long while, that felt like the most natural truth in the world. The next few days slipped by in a rhythm Blake hadn't expected. He woke early for feedings, cleaned tiny spills, warmed towels in the dryer, and carried Rowan from room to room like a single father learning the habits of a newborn. Rowan, in turn, clung to him with unwavering trust, nuzzling into his chest, curling under his chin, or pawing at his hands whenever he tried to put him down. It was sweet, chaotic, and strangely grounding. But there was something else, too. Something that whispered at the edges of each moment. Something Blake couldn't shake no matter how much he tried to ignore it. Rowan was growing too quickly. Much too quickly. On the third morning, when Blake lifted Rowan from the towels where he slept, he nearly dropped him from surprise. Rowan felt heavier, substantially so. Not in a way that could be blamed on a full stomach or thick fur. His paws, once small and slightly clumsy, now spread wide across Blake's forearm. His head had a new roundness to it, and the fur around his face had deepened into richer tones of gold and tan. Still a baby, yes, but a baby that was growing like something wild. "Slow down," Blake muttered as he adjusted his grip. "You're supposed to stay tiny for at least a couple weeks." Rowan blinked up at him with innocent eyes, then reached out to pat Blake's cheek with that oversized paw. The gesture was so gentle, so trusting, that Blake pushed the worry aside. He carried Rowan to the kitchen, fixed his warm cloth of milk, and watched him grip and pull with surprising strength. The feeding lasted only a few moments before Rowan sat back on the counter, licking his lips and letting out that same strange rumbling sound. Not quite a purr, not quite anything familiar. When Rowan tried to jump from the counter to Blake's shoulder, he nearly succeeded. The leap was clumsy and off balance, but the height he reached startled Blake enough that he caught Rowan mid-air. "Okay," Blake breathed, holding him close. "You're full of surprises." Later that afternoon, Jamie dropped by with a bag of groceries and a look that said she expected trouble. She stepped into the living room, took one glance at Rowan sprawled across Blake's lap, and froze. "Blake," she whispered, "he's double the size he was when you found him." "It's only been a couple days," Blake replied, trying to sound casual. "He's just eating well." Jamie crossed her arms. "Kittens don't bulk up like they're on some protein program. And those paws—" She leaned in, narrowing her eyes. "He looks like he's wearing snowshoes." Rowan, sensing a new presence, rolled to his feet and stumbled toward her, tail flicking behind him. He tripped over the rug, recovered, and padded forward with that half-awkward, half-determined energy that made him endearing. Jamie backed up a step. "Is he purring?" she asked. "That's what I thought at first." Jamie's eyes widened. "Blake, that's not a purr." Rowan reached her and sat down heavily, as if he had forgotten how to balance properly. He lifted a paw and pressed it against her shoe, then gave a soft rumble, the same low vibration that seemed to vibrate through the room. Jamie exhaled sharply. "Blake, something's off. You need to get him checked." "I will," he said quickly. "I'm going to the vet tomorrow." "Tomorrow," she repeated, unconvinced. "Just be careful." After she left, the atmosphere in the apartment settled into a different kind of quiet, one filled with questions Blake wasn't ready to answer. He tried distracting himself with chores, but Rowan stayed at his heels like a shadow. When Blake washed dishes, Rowan stretched up the cabinet, trying to climb. When Blake folded laundry, Rowan burrowed into the warm pile and hid. When Blake sat on the floor to sort papers, Rowan dragged the corner of his shirt with his teeth until Blake surrendered and scooped him up. Despite the worry threading through Blake's thoughts, the connection between them continued to deepen. Rowan leaned into him with full trust, as if Blake was the only safe place in the world. Every touch, every tiny rumble, every determined attempt to stay close made Blake's heart ache in ways he didn't expect. That evening, Blake sat on the couch sorting through old mail. Rowan rested on his lap, gently gnawing the edge of a blanket. The creature's tail swayed rhythmically like a metronome keeping time with Blake's thoughts. On impulse, Blake lifted his phone and took another short video. Rowan's ears, Rowan's oversized paws, Rowan rolling lazily onto his back. "You're going to be the death of me," Blake murmured into the camera, I can't get anything done with you around. Rowan let out a small rumble in response, as if agreeing. When Blake stopped recording, he set the phone aside and leaned back. Rowan climbed up his chest, gripping his shirt for balance, and rested his head beneath Blake's chin. Blake rested his palm on Rowan's back, feeling the strong, steady breaths underneath. But it was impossible to ignore the truth any longer. Rowan wasn't just a misfit kitten. He wasn't just a stray. He was something else. Something that seemed to grow stronger and larger with every hour that passed. That night, as Blake tucked Rowan into his bed of towels, he lingered longer than usual. He watched Rowan knead the blanket with paws too large, watched him curl into a tight ball of golden fur, watched the subtle rise and fall of his tiny body. "Whatever you are," Blake whispered into the dim room, "we'll figure it out." Rowan stirred at the sound of his voice, opening one sleepy eye. Blake reached out and brushed his fingers through the warm fur. Rowan nudged his hand gently, then drifted back to sleep. Blake stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the little creature he'd rescued. Something in his chest tightened. Not fear, not regret, but a strange mix of protectiveness and uncertainty he couldn't fully name. Rowan was growing fast. Rowan was different. Rowan was something wild. But Rowan was his. And as Blake turned off the light and stepped into the hallway, he knew the peace of the past few days couldn't last. Sooner or later, the truth behind Rowan's strange, rapid growth would force its way into the narrow apartment, no matter how much he wished he could hold it off. Still, for now, Rowan slept soundly, and Blake held on to that small, fragile normalcy for as long as he could. But normal never lasts. Not when something wild is quietly growing inside the walls of a third-floor apartment. It happened on a Tuesday night, the kind of quiet Nebraska evening when the world seemed settled under a blanket of stillness. Blake had just come home from a long shift. He placed his keys on the counter, kicked off his boots, and looked toward the guest room. Rowan was curled into the blankets, bigger than he had been that morning, not by a little. By enough that Blake paused in the doorway, taking in the roundness of the shoulders, the strength behind the hind legs, the way Rowan's paws now sprawled over the edge of the folded towels. "You're making a career out of growing," Blake muttered gently. Rowan lifted his head at the sound of Blake's voice, blinking slowly before letting out a soft, throaty rumble. Not a cry, not a meow. Something deeper, warmer, and strangely comforting. Blake crouched down, rubbing a hand over the top of Rowan's head. The fur was thickening, richer in color. The creature leaned into the touch, eyes fluttering closed. That moment, warm, calm, safe, was the last peaceful breath before the night unraveled. Around 9, the power flickered, then cut out entirely. The apartment fell into sudden darkness, the kind that makes every sound feel louder. Outside, wind pushed against the siding, rattling something loose on the roof. Blake reached for his phone to turn on the flashlight. Behind him, Rowan's soft breathing changed, hesitant at first, then tight and uneasy. "It's okay," Blake whispered. "Just a little outage. Happens all the time." But then, from the corner of the living room, came a sudden whir. The unmistakable hum of the old vacuum robot booting itself back on after the surge. Its wheels clicked to life, and it groaned loudly as it struggled against the leg of the coffee table. The noise sliced through the darkness like a threat. Rowan reacted instantly. A shrill, startled cry burst from him, higher than any sound Blake had heard from him before. The creature scrambled back, paws skidding across the hardwood, claws clicking. Then, fueled by pure instinct, Rowan lunged away from the noise and slammed full force into one of the living room end tables. The lamp sitting on top jolted, wobbled, and crashed to the floor. The bulb shattered in a burst of tiny stars. "Rowan!" Blake rushed toward him, hands outstretched, trying to calm him, but Rowan was in a panic. His body trembled, chest heaving, eyes wide with instinctive fear. The vacuum shifted again, bumping against a wall, and the sound drove Rowan into another frantic bolt. He whipped around, tail striking a stack of books that scattered to the floor. His back legs hit the coffee table next, sending a coaster skittering across the room. Blake reached him just as Rowan turned in tight circles, trying to escape something that wasn't even chasing him. Hey, easy boy, easy. You're all right. I'm here." He scooped Rowan into his arms as best he could, holding the trembling body close to his chest. Rowan buried his face into Blake's shirt, gripping the fabric with newfound strength. Blake staggered back a step, shocked by how solid Rowan felt, how heavy, and how strong. "It's okay," Blake repeated, breath shaky. "You're okay, little man. You're all right." Gradually, Rowan's small body stopped jerking. His breaths softened, though still uneven. He nudged into the crook of Blake's neck, seeking warmth, safety, anything steady in the dark. Blake slid down to the floor, legs bent, Rowan pressed against him like a frightened child. He rocked him gently, running his hand down Rowan's back. The fur was warm, trembling under his palm. "There you go," he whispered. "You're safe." It took minutes, long, slow minutes, for Rowan's muscles to relax fully. When the creature finally lifted his head, Blake could barely see him in the dim glow of the streetlight spilling through the blinds. But he felt the soft brush of Rowan's whiskers, the way he nudged Blake's chin like an apology. Blake exhaled, long and deep. "It's not your fault. That vacuum scares me too." He stood carefully, cradling Rowan, and carried him back to the guest room. Whatever Rowan was, he trusted Blake completely. That trust weighed on him, heavy, warm, and terrifying all at once. As he laid Rowan down, Blake noticed the small scrape on his foreleg from hitting the table. No blood, nothing serious, just a reminder of how easily things could go wrong. He brushed Rowan's fur gently. "We've got to get you checked out tomorrow," he whispered. "Something's going on with you. Something I need help understanding." Rowan pressed his forehead into Blake's hand, the gesture soft and startlingly emotional. Blake's chest tightened. This wasn't just a frightened animal. This was a baby, attached, vulnerable, and far from anything that resembled a normal kitten. When Blake stepped back into the living room, he surveyed the scattered books, the shattered lamp, the overturned table, and all at once the truth settled like a weight he had been trying to ignore. Rowan wasn't just growing quickly. Rowan was strong, much too strong for something his size. And Blake realized his apartment, his routines, his understanding of what he'd found in that cornfield. None of it was big enough anymore. He turned off the vacuum robot, unplugged it for good measure, and leaned against the doorway. In the silence that followed, a flicker of unease rose in his chest. Not fear of Rowan, but fear of the unknown. The night had shattered more than a lamp. It had shattered the illusion that this was simple. Rowan needed him, more than ever. And Blake, for reasons he couldn't explain, needed Rowan too. Morning came too quickly. Blake hadn't slept much after the chaos of the night before. Every time he drifted off, a noise jolted him awake. A car door in the parking lot, the hum of an appliance, the soft rustle of Rowan shifting in his blanket bed. Each sound reminded him how fragile the situation had become, how fast Rowan was growing, how strong he already was. But when the sun finally filtered through the blinds, warm and quiet, Blake stood up with a resolve he hadn't felt in days. "Today," he whispered to himself, "we get answers." Rowan lifted his head from the blankets, blinking in the soft light. He stretched, and Blake froze. He could see the strength ripple through Rowan's limbs. Not like a kitten waking from sleep, but something sturdier. Something built for far more than apartment living. Rowan stumbled toward him, big paws thudding softly against the carpet, his tail flicking in a clumsy arc. Blake knelt beside him and brushed a hand down his back. "Easy, little man," he murmured. "We're going to see someone who can help." It took longer than Blake expected to get ready. Rowan followed him everywhere, weaving between his legs, tugging on his pant leg with tiny teeth, demanding to be held. He didn't want to be put down, not after the panic of last night. Blake finally picked him up, holding him against his chest, feeling Rowan's warm body press closer, as if he feared being left behind. The drive to Dr. Shelby's clinic was quiet. Rowan curled in Blake's lap, watching the passing world with wide, curious eyes. Every so often, Rowan lifted his head and placed a paw on Blake's arm, as if making sure he hadn't disappeared. Blake rubbed his thumb gently along Rowan's cheek, whispering, "It's okay. We'll figure this out." When he pulled into the clinic parking lot, his chest tightened. He'd been here many times with rescued barn cats or stray dogs he'd found on job sites. But this felt entirely different. He stepped out of the truck and held Rowan securely, his grip protective and tense. The automatic door chimed as he walked inside. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman named Carol, smiled before noticing what he carried. Her smile faltered. "Oh my, what a big little guy." "Found him in a field," Blake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Thought he was a kitten, but he's growing strange, acting strange too." Carol nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on Rowan's paws, massive for his size. "Dr. Shelby can see you right away." Inside the exam room, Rowan clung to Blake's shirt like he was hanging on in a storm. Blake sat in the chair with Rowan on his lap, whispering softly, rubbing circles into his back. Rowan calmed little by little, burying his face into the crook of Blake's elbow. When the door opened, Dr. Shelby stepped in. She was small, calm, with decades of experience written across her face. "Blake," she said warmly, but the moment her eyes fell on Rowan, her expression changed. Her steps slowed. "Is that the kitten?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," Blake said. "He's gotten bigger fast." Dr. Shelby approached slowly, her gaze focused on Rowan in a way Blake had never seen before. Not fear, not confusion, but something sharper, something like recognition. "May I?" she asked. Rowan tensed, pressing harder into Blake's chest. Blake stroked his back. "It's okay, Rowan. She's here to help." Dr. Shelby crouched, keeping her voice soft. "Hey there, little one. Let me see you." Rowan sniffed her hand, then let her touch his cheek. But the moment her fingers pressed near his jaw, her brows drew tight. "This isn't a domestic kitten," she whispered. Blake exhaled shakily. "Okay, so what is he? Some kind of wildcat? A bobcat? A lynx backcross, maybe?" Dr. Shelby didn't answer immediately. She gently touched Rowan's paws. The size, the shape, the thickness of the pad. She checked the ears, the pattern of his coat, the subtle muscle development beneath the fur. Then, slowly, she lifted Rowan's upper lip to look at the developing teeth. That was when her eyes widened. "Oh, Blake," she breathed. This isn't a bobcat, and it's definitely not a lynx." Blake felt his heartbeat thundering. "Then what is he?" Dr. Shelby looked at him, her face pale. "He's a lion cub." For a moment, the world went silent. The faint ticking of the wall clock echoed like distant thunder. Blake's breath halted in his chest. "No," he finally whispered. "That's impossible. There aren't lions here." "There are in illegal transport shipments," Dr. Shelby said gently. "And sometimes, they lose one." Blake looked down at Rowan, who gazed up at him with complete trust. A lion cub, a baby lion, had curled on his chest, slept in his bed of towels, nuzzled his shirt like a newborn. A lion cub had panicked at a vacuum robot and nearly knocked over every piece of furniture in the dark. A lion cub was growing rapidly inside his apartment. Dr. Shelby placed a calming hand on Blake's shoulder. He won't survive without proper care. And legally, you can't keep him. You could get into trouble if the authorities find out. Rowan whimpered softly, sensing Blake's sudden tension. Blake immediately pulled him closer, whispering, "It's okay, little man. I'm here." Dr. Shelby's voice softened. "I know you care for him. He clearly trusts you. But you need to understand, he's going to grow much bigger, much stronger, and soon." Blake swallowed hard. "What happens to him if I tell someone?" "That depends," she said. "He'd be transferred to a wildlife facility, a sanctuary, somewhere safe. But you might not get to stay in his life." Those words pierced deeper than Blake expected. He looked at Rowan, the tiny cub who had curled beneath his chin every night, who trusted him completely. The thought of handing Rowan over to strangers felt like losing something he didn't know he desperately needed. He whispered, "He's just a baby." "I know," Dr. Shelby replied softly, "but babies grow." Rowan reached up and pressed his paw against Blake's chin, a gesture so familiar, so heartbreakingly innocent, that Blake felt something twist inside him. He wasn't ready to lose this little creature. He wasn't ready to lose Rowan. Dr. Shelby stepped back, giving him space. "Take the night to think. But Blake, time matters. And the bigger he grows, the harder this decision becomes." Blake nodded, though his chest felt tight enough to crack. He gathered Rowan into his arms and stood, cradling him protectively. As he walked out of the clinic and back into the sunlight, Rowan blinked against the brightness, lifted his paw, and touched Blake's jaw like he always did after waking up. A lion cub. Blake held him closer. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He only knew one thing. He wasn't ready to let go. The drive home from the clinic felt longer than it should have. The Nebraska sun glinted off the hood of the truck, bright enough to force Blake to squint. But nothing outside the windshield looked real. His hands stayed tight on the steering wheel, knuckles pale, while Rowan lay curled in his lap, pressing close, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around them. Every few minutes, Rowan lifted his head and nudged Blake's arm with the soft urgency of a child needing reassurance. Blake stroked between his ears, whispering, "I've got you," though the words felt shaky in his throat. When he parked in front of his building, Blake didn't get out right away. He sat with the engine ticking in the quiet, trying to understand how his life had changed in the span of a single sentence. "He's a lion cub." The words echoed through his head, cold and inevitable, yet Rowan's warm weight in his lap made the truth feel distant, unreal. He looked down at the cub, small enough to cradle, vulnerable enough to break his heart, and said softly, "How am I supposed to give you away?" Rowan answered only with a gentle rumble and pressed his face against Blake's wrist. Inside the apartment, Blake laid Rowan on the couch and sank down beside him, elbows resting on his knees. The room felt smaller, the walls closer, everything too quiet, too still. Rowan stretched lazily, rolling halfway onto his back, pawing gently at Blake's thigh as if calling him back into the moment. Blake scooped him up and held him against his chest, burying his face in the warm fur. Rowan relaxed instantly, melting into the embrace with the trust of something that had never known a different world. But the worry didn't melt with him. Hours passed in a blur. Rowan napped, explored the kitchen, tripped over his own feet, followed Blake from room to room, and curled around his boot whenever he stood still for too long. Blake fed him, stroked him, whispered to him, anything to quiet the rising ache in his chest. Near sunset, Jamie knocked on the door. Blake hesitated before opening it. He knew that talking to her meant facing the truth again. The moment she stepped in, her eyes landed on Rowan, larger than ever, paws draped over the edge of the couch, chest rising in deep, heavy breaths. "Oh God," she whispered. "He grew again?" Blake nodded. Jamie approached slowly, careful but kind. Rowan lifted his head, blinking sleepily at her before stretching out one large paw. Jamie froze when she saw the size of it. "Blake," she said, voice trembling. "He's not just a little wild. He's going to be huge." "I know," Blake whispered, looking away. "And what did Dr. Shelby say?" she pressed. He swallowed. "She said he's a lion cub." Jamie's hand flew to her mouth. She sat down heavily beside him. "What are you going to do?" Blake stared at the floor. "I don't know." "You can't keep him, Blake," she said gently. "Not in an apartment. Not in your life like this." He lifted his head sharply. "He needs me. And someday he'll need something you can't give." She reached for his arm. "This isn't your fault. You did right by him. But this is bigger than you." Blake closed his eyes. Rowan crawled into his lap then, clumsy and affectionate, pushing his head under Blake's palm. Blake's breath hitched. Jamie watched, her expression softening. "You love him," she said quietly. "I do," Blake whispered. "More than I expected. More than makes sense." Jamie nodded slowly. "Love doesn't always mean keeping something. Sometimes it means letting go before you can't." The words settled like stones in Blake's chest. But when he looked down, Rowan was staring up at him, eyes wide, trusting, and impossibly innocent. Blake felt his resolve shatter. "I can't," he said. "Not yet." Jamie didn't argue. She simply placed a hand on his back and whispered, "Then you need a plan, before the world finds out for you." That night, long after Jamie left, Blake sat on the living room floor with Rowan curled against him. The cub's breathing grew slow, rhythmic, soothing, but Blake's thoughts wouldn't settle. He turned off the lights except for the small lamp in the corner. Shadows stretched softly across the room as Rowan slept in his arms. Blake stared at him, brushing a thumb over the cub's cheek, memorizing every feature, as if afraid he wouldn't have many days left to hold him like this. Rowan shifted in his sleep, stretching one paw up to rest against Blake's chest. The touch was feather light, but it held the weight of something deeper, something that made Blake feel responsible in a way he had never felt responsible for anyone or anything. A sound from the hallway made Rowan stir, ears twitching. Blake gently soothed him, murmuring soft words until the cub settled again. Then he looked toward the front door, feeling an unwelcome chill snake down his spine. If the neighbors heard Rowan's strange sounds, or saw him, everything could unravel instantly. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the cub's warmth against him. The thought of losing Rowan cut through him like a blade. The thought of Rowan alone, afraid, surrounded by strangers who didn't know him, who didn't love him, was unbearable. Blake tightened his hold slightly. "Whatever happens," he whispered into Rowan's fur, "you're not alone. Not while I can help it." The cub let out a sleepy rumble, his small body rising and falling against Blake's chest. Blake stayed like that for a long time, the weight of the coming days pressing heavily on him, the truth too close to deny but too painful to face. Eventually, he laid Rowan down onto his blankets, smoothing the fur between his ears carefully. Rowan curled into a tiny ball, though less tiny by the day, and blinked up at him once before closing his eyes. Blake stood in the doorway, watching him, hand resting against the frame. He knew what the right thing to do was, but he also knew he wasn't ready. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And that truth hurt more than anything Dr. Shelby had said. He turned off the light and whispered, "Good night, little man." But as he walked down the hall, his heart felt heavier than it ever had in his life, because tomorrow was coming, and with it, the decision no parent ever wants to make. But morning arrived the way it always did, quiet, ordinary, almost gentle in its refusal to acknowledge the storm building inside Blake's chest. Rowan woke him before sunrise, nudging his cheek with a paw that no longer felt small. Blake opened his eyes to find the cub standing beside the bed, tail swishing, eager for attention. For a moment, nothing felt complicated. It was just the two of them again, in their own little world suspended above the parking lot. "Hey, buddy," Blake murmured, rubbing Rowan's head. "You hungry?" Rowan answered by climbing clumsily onto the bed, his weight heavier than Blake expected. The mattress dipped sharply, and Blake huffed out a breath. "You are growing way too fast," he said, half scolding, half amazed. Rowan stretched across him, sprawled like an oversized toddler, pressing his face into Blake's ribs. Blake laughed despite the heaviness in his heart. All right, you win. Breakfast for both of us." In the kitchen, Rowan followed at Blake's heels, weaving between his legs, nearly sending him stumbling twice. When Blake opened the fridge, Rowan tried to stick his head inside, sniffing everything within reach. Blake gently nudged him back. "No, sir, we're not doing that." Rowan rumbled in protest. He warmed Rowan's milk substitute, stronger and richer per Dr. Shelby's instructions, and poured it into the shallow bowl he kept on the counter. Rowan jumped onto the chair and then attempted the counter itself. The jump was too ambitious. His back paw slipped, sending him sliding off the chair. Blake lunged forward, catching him with both arms. "Whoa, easy there, big guy," Blake said, heart pounding. "You trying to fly?" Rowan bopped Blake's chin with a paw, unbothered by his failed attempt. Blake sighed. "You're gonna give me gray hair before my time." After breakfast, Blake tried to get some work done. Emails, invoices, scheduling service calls. But Rowan had other plans. As soon as Blake sat at his small desk in the corner of the living room, Rowan climbed onto his lap. When Blake gently placed him on the floor, Rowan wedged himself under the chair, poking his head between the wheels and tugging on Blake's pant leg. "Rowan, buddy, I need both hands," Blake pleaded. Rowan responded by planting his huge paws on Blake's thigh and pulling himself up with surprising strength. He clambered into Blake's lap again, this time stretching across him like a weighted blanket. At this point, Blake couldn't even reach the keyboard. Rowan nuzzled into his shirt and let out a low, contented rumble. "All right," Blake whispered. "I surrender." He leaned back, arms resting around Rowan, letting the cub snooze across him. Outside, the world went on as usual, neighbors leaving for work, birds chirping in the cold morning air. But inside this apartment, time slowed. And for a little while, Blake forgot that everything was about to change. Later, Rowan discovered the laundry hamper. Blake had barely set it down before Rowan dove inside headfirst, wrestling the socks like they'd personally offended him. He managed to knock the hamper over, then tumbled out with a triumphant squeak. "You're a menace," Blake said fondly. Rowan tried to drag a towel twice his size across the living room. When he couldn't, he sat on it instead, looking proud. He batted at Blake's shoes, chewed on the corner of the couch cushion, and tried to pounce on the dust motes floating in the sunlight. But there were cracks in the sweetness. Twice, Rowan nearly toppled the floor lamp. Once, while trying to climb onto the couch, he overestimated his strength and slammed his shoulder into the coffee table, knocking it sideways. Another time, he rolled right into the hallway wall with a thump that startled them both. Blake knelt beside him, checking him over. "Careful, buddy," he whispered. You're not as little as you think anymore." Rowan pressed his forehead into Blake's palm, offering comfort rather than seeking it. That moment cut deeper than Blake expected. The afternoon brought more challenges. When Blake took out the trash, Rowan cried behind the door, pacing until Blake returned, just 2 minutes later. When Blake showered, Rowan laid outside the bathroom, paws slipped under the crack, claws tapping gently as if counting the seconds. And when Blake swept the living room, Rowan followed each stroke of the broom like it was an invitation to play. He finally grabbed the bristles, growling playfully. Blake tried tugging it back. Rowan tugged harder, much harder. "Hey, Rowan, buddy, let go!" Rowan yanked one final time, and the broom flew out of Blake's hand. Rowan pranced with it like he'd won a trophy. Blake bent over, hands on his knees. "You're gonna be the end of me." Despite the chaos, laughter kept slipping out of him. But between the laughs were the moments that made his breath catch, like when Rowan jumped onto the couch and landed with enough force to make the cushions shift. Like when he stretched across Blake's thighs, and Blake could feel the growing strength rippling beneath his fur. Like when he barreled accidentally into Blake during playtime, knocking him back a couple inches. Rowan wasn't trying to be rough. He was just becoming what he truly was, and Blake knew he had to face that truth eventually. But not today. Not yet. As night settled, Rowan grew sleepy again. He crawled into Blake's lap, curling into a warm, heavy bundle. Blake stroked his back, watching his chest rise and fall. "You don't know what's coming," Blake whispered, "and I don't know how to tell you." Rowan opened one sleepy eye, lifted a paw, and rested it on Blake's chest, right over his heart. A gesture so simple and so gentle that Blake felt something inside him crack open. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to Rowan's head. "I'm not ready," he whispered, "but I promise I won't let anything hurt you." Rowan rumbled softly. The lamp glowed low. The apartment was warm. And in that moment, with Rowan asleep in his arms, Blake let himself pretend that this life, the laughter, the chaos, the closeness, could last. He knew it couldn't. But tonight, he held on to the illusion a little longer. Tomorrow could wait. But tomorrow didn't ask for permission. It arrived with weight, with change, with a quiet crack in the world Blake had been trying so desperately to protect. Rowan woke him just after sunrise, nudging his face with a paw that no longer felt soft and harmless. Blake blinked awake to find Rowan standing beside the bed, larger again, noticeably larger. His shoulders had broadened, his legs were thicker, and his paws were the size of Blake's palms now. "Rowan," Blake whispered, sitting up slowly. "What on earth are you turning into overnight?" Rowan responded with a deep, affectionate rumble, pressing his face into Blake's arm. Blake wrapped his arms around him, but even that felt different. Rowan's body filled more space now. His weight pressed down heavier. His breath ruffled Blake's shirt. Still, Rowan was gentle as ever. Blake got ready for the day with Rowan underfoot, literally. The cub followed him into the bathroom and tried once again to climb into the tub while Blake brushed his teeth. Rowan nosed at his pant leg while he made coffee, and when Blake stepped too far, Rowan let out a tiny wounded cry as if offended he'd been left behind. "You're impossible," Blake murmured, "but cute. I'll give you that." Rowan trilled softly, the sound vibrating deep in his chest. But as the morning went on, the small signs of change grew too big to ignore. When Blake opened the freezer to grab a bag of frozen berries, Rowan stood on his hind legs, standing almost to Blake's waist, and leaned in to sniff everything inside. His posture, his height, the strength behind his stance startled Blake so much he had to press a hand against Rowan's chest to steady him. "Whoa there," Blake said. "Easy." Rowan licked his hand affectionately, unaware that he'd nearly knocked Blake over with a single lean. Later, when Blake tried to sweep the kitchen, Rowan pounced at the broom again. Only this time, when he grabbed hold with his jaws and tugged, the wooden handle snapped clean in half. Blake froze. Rowan froze too, the broken piece of broom still clamped in his mouth, looking genuinely confused. "Oh, buddy," Blake whispered. "You don't know your own strength." Rowan dropped the broom handle and stepped toward Blake, ears flattening slightly, sensing his distress. Blake knelt down and took Rowan's face in both hands. The cub leaned into his palms, eyes soft, trusting, oblivious to the size he'd grown into. But the moment couldn't last. Around noon, Blake decided to take a short break from work. Rowan nudged him with insistent paws until Blake finally grabbed the rope toy, a thick, braided rope he thought was strong enough for a large dog. Rowan perked up instantly, ears forward, tail flicking with excitement. "You ready?" Blake teased, waving the rope. Rowan bounded forward. The impact hit Blake harder than he expected. Rowan's chest collided with his knees, sending him stumbling backward onto the couch. Rowan scrambled onto him, triumphant, placing both paws on Blake's shoulders as if pinning him in victory. "Hey, easy, easy!" Blake laughed nervously, trying to shift his weight to sit upright. But Rowan thought it was a game. He pushed again, this time with a bit more force. Blake's laughter stopped as he was shoved back against the cushions. Rowan leaned over him, his face close, rumbling happily, completely unaware that Blake's breath had hitched from the sheer weight pressing him down. "You're stronger than you think, bud," Blake managed softly. Rowan backed off when he sensed Blake's unease, sitting at his feet with wide, concerned eyes. He nudged Blake's knee gently with his nose, offering an apology in the only language he knew. Blake stroked his head. "I'm not mad, just surprised." But his hand trembled. The illusion shattered a little. By afternoon, the neighbor's baby began to cry through the thin apartment walls. Rowan's head shot up instantly, eyes sharp, ears turning toward the sound. He didn't move aggressively, just alertly, but even that sent a ripple of worry through Blake's spine. "Hey," Blake whispered. "It's okay. It's just the Evans baby." Rowan's ears stayed locked in that direction for a long moment before finally relaxing. He turned back to Blake and rested his head in Blake's lap, trusting him completely. But Blake was no longer sure he could trust the situation. Near evening, it happened, the moment that shifted everything. Blake was dusting the bookshelf, and Rowan trotted over, wanting attention. He pressed his weight against Blake's legs affectionately, but with enough force to knock Blake off balance. Blake fell sideways, striking his shoulder against the corner of the couch. Rowan panicked, immediately jumping onto the couch to check on him, pawing frantically at Blake's chest. The cub's claws grazed Blake's shirt, tearing the fabric. Rowan, it's okay," Blake whispered, wincing. Rowan whimpered, a soft, heartbreaking sound, as he pressed his head against Blake's ribs. Blake held him tight, soothing him until Rowan stopped shaking. But as he sat there, stroking Rowan's fur, Blake felt a cold truth sinking deep into his bones. Rowan wasn't trying to hurt him. Rowan loved him. But love wasn't enough to change what Rowan was becoming. He was growing faster than any normal animal Blake had ever cared for, stronger than Blake could safely handle, and still so young. When Rowan finally fell asleep stretched across Blake's lap, half his body draped over the couch, half pulling at Blake's legs, Blake looked down at him with a mixture of affection and fear. "I don't know how much longer I can keep you here," he whispered. "And I hate that." Rowan shifted in his sleep, sighing deeply. Blake leaned forward and pressed his forehead to Rowan's soft fur. His voice broke as he whispered, "You're going to break my heart, little man. Just by growing." Outside, the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in soft golds and reds. Inside, Blake held Rowan in his arms and felt something inside himself unravel. Not from fear, but from the knowledge that love, no matter how strong, might not be enough to keep them together. And the realization hurt more than anything he had ever felt. The next morning came quietly, but inside Blake nothing felt calm. Sleep had barely touched him. Every time he drifted off, he saw Rowan as he had been the night before, frightened, confused, too strong for his own good, and still trying to curl into Blake's lap as if he were no heavier than the day Blake found him. Blake woke with the weight of that truth pressing against his ribs, the way Rowan had pressed his head there so many times. He made coffee with a heaviness that felt wrong in his own kitchen. Rowan followed him, brushing against his leg, stretching his long body across the floor. When Blake turned, Rowan accidentally knocked into his shin. It didn't hurt, not really, but it reminded Blake of the widening gap between what Rowan wanted to be, a baby, and what Rowan actually was becoming. "Morning, big guy," Blake whispered, kneeling down. Rowan lifted his oversized paw and placed it gently on Blake's shoulder, his version of a greeting. His eyes were soft, warm, full of trust. Blake swallowed hard and rubbed behind his ear, whispering, "I don't know what to do." Rowan's answer was a small, affectionate rumble. It was around 11 when Blake's phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but he answered anyway, his voice low. "Hello? Blake? This is Dr. Shelby." He felt Rowan's head lift against his knee at the change in tone. "Hey, Doc. I've been thinking about your situation since yesterday," she said. "And I reached out to someone who might be able to help. A colleague of mine at a wildlife rescue in Colorado, Rocky Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary." Blake's pulse kicked hard. "And?" "They've dealt with big cats before," Dr. Shelby continued. "And they're legitimate, fully certified, highly respected. I explained Rowan's condition, and they're willing to take him." Blake closed his eyes. Take him. Not help him. Not examine him. Take him. Dr. Shelby's voice gentled. "If you want, you can be part of the transition. It might make it easier for him." Rowan nudged Blake's hand, sensing tension, his soft muzzle brushing Blake's wrist. Blake whispered, "Doc, he's just a baby." "I know," she replied softly, "but he won't stay a baby. He'll grow fast, and soon you won't be able to keep him, or keep others safe. Sanctuaries exist for animals like Rowan, places where he can be cared for by people trained to handle what he's becoming." Rowan rested his heavy head on Blake's thigh and looked up at him with innocent golden eyes. Blake's throat tightened. "What if he's scared? What if he thinks I abandoned him?" "Then you go with him," Dr. Shelby said gently. "Stay for as long as they allow. Help him adjust. That's the most loving thing you can do." Blake's eyes burned. He pressed his palm to Rowan's head, running his fingers through the thickening fur. Rowan leaned into the touch and closed his eyes. "Think about it," Dr. Shelby said. "I'll text you the director's number. They can take him as early as next week." Next week. It felt like the floor dropped out beneath him. After the call, Blake sat on the couch with Rowan curled against him. The cub sprawled across his lap, larger than ever, but still seeking comfort like a newborn. Blake stroked along his spine, feeling the growing power beneath the fur. "You don't know what's coming," Blake whispered, "and I don't know how to tell you." Rowan shifted, placing a paw gently on Blake's chest. The gesture was so tender it nearly undid him. The day passed slowly. Blake moved through the apartment in a haze. Rowan followed him everywhere, trailing behind like a shadow, bumping his legs, rubbing against him, curling around his feet whenever he stopped. The closeness hurt. The trust hurt more. He tried to distract himself by cleaning, but Rowan turned everything into a game. When Blake tried sweeping, Rowan pounced the dustpan. When Blake folded towels, Rowan stole one and trotted proudly across the apartment with it. When Blake opened the fridge, Rowan tried to climb inside again, and Blake caught him with trembling hands. Every little moment felt painfully precious. By afternoon, Blake knew what he had to do. He knelt on the living room rug, hands resting on Rowan's shoulders. Rowan sat still, sensing the gravity in the air. His golden eyes met Blake's in a way that felt too human. "There's a place that can take care of you," Blake whispered. "Somewhere big, somewhere safe. And I'll go with you. I promise." Rowan tilted his head, confused. "You're meant for bigger things than my little apartment," Blake murmured. "And I'm standing in the way of that." Rowan pressed his forehead into Blake's chest, and Blake wrapped his arms around him, pulling him close, burying his face in Rowan's thick fur. The scent of him, warm, earthy, familiar, swallowed him whole. "I love you, little man," Blake whispered, voice breaking. "More than I should have let myself." Rowan rumbled, a soft, fragile sound. As night fell, Blake sat with Rowan on the couch, the cub's weight pressed full across his lap, his head tucked under Blake's chin. Outside, porch lights flickered on one by one. Life went on. Neighbors talked in the hall. A dog barked in the courtyard. But inside the apartment, time felt suspended. Blake held Rowan and whispered stories about the day he found him, about how brave he was, about how lucky Blake felt that a tiny cry in a Nebraska cornfield had led to him. "You saved me," Blake whispered into Rowan's fur, "and I hope this next place saves you right back." Rowan shifted, sighing deeply as he fell asleep. Blake didn't move. Not for a long, long time. He held Rowan through the quiet hours, knowing that every breath, every rumble, every little twitch was counting down the days to the moment he would have to say goodbye. And though he tried to be strong, tears finally slipped down his cheeks as he whispered, "I'll do the right thing for you, even if it breaks me." Rowan slept peacefully, unaware of the choice already made. A choice that would change both of their lives forever. The next week moved in slow motion, every hour heavy, every moment sharper than the last. Blake counted Rowan's breaths at night, memorizing the rise and fall of his chest. He watched him tumble across the living room, pounce on towels, drag blankets around like trophies, and shove his big, soft head under Blake's hand for affection. Every laugh Blake managed carried an ache. Every touch felt like the last of something precious. When the call finally came from Rocky Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary, confirming their availability, Blake felt his chest clench with a pain he'd never known. The director, a calm woman named Marlene, spoke gently. "We'll make the transition as smooth as possible, for both of you." Both of you. Blake had never felt more seen or more broken. He hung up the call and sat on the couch, staring at Rowan sprawled across the rug, batting lazily at the dangling shoelace of Blake's boot. The cub's paws were enormous now, his movements stronger, more coordinated. His voice had deepened too, still soft and babyish, but with a hint of something older beneath it. He had grown into a creature with life bigger than the walls around him. And Blake knew he couldn't keep him any longer. On the morning of the trip, Blake packed a bag with Rowan's blankets, a couple of his favorite toys, and the rope he always carried around the apartment. Rowan followed him nervously, sensing something different in the air. He kept nudging Blake's leg, whining softly, pacing the hallway as if trying to puzzle out the shift. "We're going on a little trip," Blake whispered, scratching behind Rowan's ears. "It's okay. I'm with you." Rowan pressed his forehead into Blake's stomach, clinging in the only way he knew how. The drive to Colorado felt endless. Miles of open fields, long highways, and silence broken only by Rowan's occasional soft rumbles from the passenger seat. Blake kept one hand resting on Rowan's back as he drove, feeling the warmth, the trust, the heartbeat that had changed his life. "Hang in there, buddy," he whispered. "We'll be okay." Rowan leaned closer, resting his heavy head in Blake's lap, and stayed that way for most of the trip. When they finally arrived at the sanctuary, Blake's breath caught in his throat. Rocky Ridge spread out across rolling hills, with high fences that didn't feel like prisons but boundaries carved by nature. He could see vast enclosures, tall grasses, rocks warmed by the sun. It was beautiful, wild, free, and it felt like the beginning of losing Rowan. Marlene met them at the entrance. Warm eyes, weathered hands, a presence that felt steady. "You must be Blake," she said softly. "And this little one is Rowan." Rowan shrank back into Blake's legs, trembling in a way Blake hadn't felt since the vacuum incident. Blake knelt down, wrapping his arms around him. "It's okay, little man. I'm right here." Marlene crouched a respectful distance away. "Take your time. We don't force first meetings. We let them come to us." Rowan didn't move. He clung to Blake like the world outside him had turned unfamiliar. Blake stroked his back, whispering, "It's okay. It's okay." After several quiet minutes, Rowan peeked at Marlene with wide, cautious eyes. She remained still, speaking in a calm tone. "You're safe here, sweetheart. No one's going to hurt you." Rowan stepped closer to Blake, pressing against his side. Blake kissed the top of his head. "I promise she's here to help." Finally, Rowan took a single step toward her, then another. Marlene didn't touch him. She let him choose. And at his own pace, Rowan leaned forward and sniffed her outstretched hand. "There you go," Blake whispered, his throat thick. Marlene stood slowly. "When you're ready, we'll move him to the cub acclimation enclosure. You can come with him." The enclosure was warm, spacious, and cozy, covered in soft straw, with shaded areas and a few rocks for climbing. Rowan walked in nervously, ears flicking at every new sound. Blake followed him inside. The moment Rowan saw him, he ran straight back, pressed his entire body against Blake's legs, and let out a helpless sound that cut through Blake's chest like fire. "Oh, buddy," Blake crouched, pulling Rowan into his arms. The cub trembled, pawing at Blake's shirt, trying to climb into his lap despite his size. Blake held him tight, feeling Rowan's heart racing against his ribs. "You're okay," Blake whispered, voice cracking. "I'm right here." Minutes passed like this, Rowan hiding his face in Blake's chest, Blake whispering reassurance, both clinging far more tightly than either should have. When Rowan finally calmed enough to explore, Blake stayed low to the ground, letting Rowan check out the space while knowing he could look back and see him. Rowan did. Every few steps, he turned to make sure Blake was still there. And Blake was. But the moment he feared most arrived sooner than he wanted. Marlene approached softly. "Blake, it's time." Rowan was beside him instantly. He pushed his head into Blake's chest so hard it almost knocked the breath out of him. Blake wrapped both arms around him, burying his face into Rowan's fur. "It's okay," Blake whispered, though his voice was shaking. "I'm not abandoning you, I promise. You're going to live a big life here. A real life." Rowan whimpered, that fragile, heartbreaking sound. Blake pulled back just enough to see his face. "Hey, look at me." Rowan lifted his eyes, those warm, golden eyes that had trusted him from the moment he was a trembling bundle in a cornfield. "You're my boy," Blake whispered. "Always." He pressed his forehead to Rowan's, closing his eyes. Rowan nudged him, slow and gentle, just like he had the first night in the apartment, curled in the towels. Then Blake stood, forcing his legs to hold him, his heart to stay steady. He stepped backward. Rowan took one step forward, another, and when the enclosure door gently closed between them, the soft thud felt like the sound of his heart cracking in two. Rowan pressed his paw to the mesh, Blake pressed his hand on the other side. For a moment, neither of them moved, just breathed through the pain. Blake whispered, "I love you, little man." Rowan rumbled softly, a sound full of confusion, longing, and trust. And for the first time since the cornfield, Blake had to walk away. He made it only a few steps before his knees buckled, and he sat in the dirt, tears falling into his open palms. Behind him, Rowan let out a soft cry, the kind that breaks a person clean in half. Blake froze. He didn't turn around. He couldn't. If he saw Rowan reaching for him again, he knew his legs wouldn't carry him forward. He stared at the ground, breathing through the ache, hands shaking against his knees. The Colorado wind brushed across his face, cool and steady, so at odds with the storm pounding inside his chest. Marlene waited a few feet away, giving him space, her voice gentle when she finally spoke. "It's always hardest with the ones who trust so deeply." Blake nodded, but the motion felt brittle. He wiped his face with the back of his sleeve and forced himself to take steady breaths. "He's just scared." "He won't be once he settles," Marlene said softly. "But this part? This is always painful. For them and for you." Behind the mesh, Rowan paced, glancing between the door and the space where Blake stood. His tail swished low, anxious, confused. Every few seconds he let out a quiet rumble, not the playful one Blake knew so well, but a trembling, searching one, the kind he used to make whenever he lost sight of Blake in the apartment. "He thinks I'm leaving him," Blake whispered. "He'll learn you didn't abandon him," Marlene said, "and you can come back as often as you need." That last sentence saved him. It didn't dull the pain, but it gave it a place to rest. Blake stayed at the sanctuary for 2 more hours. He sat by the fence while Rowan pressed close on the other side. They didn't do much. Blake simply lay his palm against the mesh while Rowan rested his paw on the same spot. Occasionally, Rowan bumped his forehead against the barrier as if trying to find the door that would make things right again. Blake talked to him quietly, nonsense words and reassurances, the same way he always had when Rowan was a trembling bundle of fur in a cornfield. Rowan listened, head low, body curled in a way that made him look small again, even though he no longer was. Eventually, the sun dipped low. Shadows stretched across the ground. Rowan's eyes grew heavy with sleep. He curled near the mesh, one paw still resting on the fence. Blake placed his hand over it and whispered, "I'll be back, I promise you." Rowan dozed off like that, trusting, pressed close, breathing slow and deep. Only when Marlene softly reminded him of the closing hours did Blake finally stand and walk away. He didn't look back, not because he didn't want to, but because he knew if he did, he might not leave at all. 6 weeks passed. Blake tried to fill his days with work, service calls, fixing air conditioners, installing new units in dusty attics and cold basements. But everywhere he went, something reminded him of Rowan. A tawny stray cat crossing a street, a stuffed lion toy in a child's room, the rumble of a big dog running across a yard. Nights were the worst. He'd jolt awake, reaching instinctively for a warm body no longer there. He called Marlene every week. She updated him with calm, steady reports. Rowan was eating well, growing fast, adjusting to the space, forming a bond with one of the keepers. Spending time outside, under the big sky he was born for. "He's doing great," she'd say. "You gave him the start he needed." Blake would thank her and hang up, equal parts proud and devastated. Finally, after what felt like months instead of weeks, Marlene invited him back. "He's ready," she said, "and I think he misses you." Blake packed the truck without thinking, just a thermos of coffee, a jacket, and the small rope toy Rowan used to drag around the apartment. He didn't even know why he grabbed it. Instinct, maybe, or hope. The sanctuary looked the same when he arrived. wide open and wild, the smell of pine and dry grass in the air. But Blake felt different stepping out of the truck, lighter and heavier at the same time. Marlene greeted him with a smile. "He's outside today. Follow me." They walked past enclosures, volunteer stations, shaded rest areas. Blake's heart thudded louder with each step. He knew Rowan must be huge now, bigger than anything he'd ever held, anything he'd ever cared for. But part of him still expected to see the tiny trembling creature from the cornfield. When they reached the viewing area, Blake stopped in his tracks. Rowan was there, sunlight gleaming off his golden coat, muscles strong and defined beneath his fur. He was magnificent, powerful, beautiful. He moved with a confidence that hadn't existed before, padding across the grass, lifting his head to sniff the wind. A real lion. But then Rowan paused. His ears twitched. His head turned sharply. He sniffed again, long and searching. And then his eyes locked onto Blake. Something changed in Rowan's posture. Recognition hit like lightning. Rowan bounded across the enclosure, not with the uncertain steps of a cub, but with the long, powerful strides of a young lion. He slowed only when he neared the fence, lowering himself, rumbling in a deep, rolling sound that vibrated through the earth. Blake stepped forward, tears blurring his vision. "Hey, little man." Rowan pressed his forehead against the fence with surprising gentleness for his size. Blake placed his palm against the mesh, just like before. Rowan's rumble grew louder, a sound filled with memory, with trust, with the bond the sanctuary hadn't taken from him. Blake whispered, voice breaking, "You remember." Rowan lifted one enormous paw and set it against the fence, mirroring the gesture he'd made as a baby. Blake laughed, a wet, choked sound, and pressed his hand over it. "You'll always be my little cornfield kitten," he said. Rowan closed his eyes, leaning his weight into the fence, as if trying to get as close as the barrier allowed. They stayed like that for a long time, man and lion, separated by steel and circumstance, but bound by something stronger than either could fully understand. When Blake finally stepped back, Rowan followed along the fence, unwilling to let the moment end. And Blake knew the truth. He had done the right thing. He had given Rowan the life he was meant for. And yet, somehow, Rowan still carried him in his heart. The wind swept across the hills as Blake turned to leave, the sky painted in shades of fading gold. Behind, a lion's soft rumble followed him through the quiet air, a reminder, a promise, a thank you he would never forget. If this story touched your heart even a little, drop a simple 1 in the comments so I know you're here with us. And if you'd like to follow more journeys like Rowan's, stories of hope, healing, and second chances, make sure to hit subscribe. Your comment, even just a single number, helps this little community grow and keeps these stories alive.